Alright, so in this video I would like to discuss it's too bumpy of a road to be recording on. Alright, so in this video I would like to discuss the concept of arbitrage, and specifically I would like to look at the idea of how quickly arbitrage takes effect. So I believe there's a common misconception about how arbitrage works, and so I'd like to give my 2 cents on that matter. So I suppose let's first note the two common perspectives that people tend to take when it comes to arbitrage. And the first is kind of known as the efficient market hypothesis, and this is where there's this idea that all information is already kind of instantaneously factored into the market, and there's just no such thing really as arbitrage. And then there's the other side where people tend to think there's tons and tons of opportunity in the market, and if you can just find the right opportunities, then there's plenty areas that are still susceptible to arbitrage. And so I'm going to take a more, I suppose, nuanced perspective on this topic. And I hate using the word nuanced just because ChatGPT loves that word and thinks that everything is nuanced. But anyway, so I'm going to take a perspective that is not quite on either side, and hopefully it will resolve what I believe to be a common misconception. So the misconception that I'd like to point out is the difference between the arbitrage of a particular data point and the arbitrage of the opportunity to make profit on that data point. So let's suppose, for sake of argument, that we're in a particular scenario where arbitrage does not take effect instantly. So for example, we might be in a situation where some stock is overvalued, and we believe that the arbitrage is not happening instantly, and thus we have some potential to make profit, to make a trade, maybe to short that stock or whatever we want to do. Now, the key point that I'd like to make is just because the arbitrage in terms of the stock being overvalued does not happen instantly, so the stock might not immediately return to its perfect value, that doesn't mean that the opportunity to trade this discrepancy is actually profitable. And the idea is that even though the price might not update immediately, this does not mean that the opportunity for profit doesn't update immediately. Why did I turn right here? So the arbitrage of a data point is not the same as the arbitrage of an opportunity to make profit on that data point. So why would I claim that this is the case? So let's consider the idea of a stock being overvalued. And the opposite of a stock being overvalued is that a stock might be undervalued. So both scenarios are possible. And if we believe that arbitrage doesn't happen instantaneously for a stock being overvalued, presumably it's the same thing for a stock being undervalued, and this is actually quite important. And I suppose they're part of the same process, right? The arbitrage is about the value not reflecting what we believe it to be, what we believe its underlying value to be, and we believe it can be traded for profit. So at any point in time, the stock could be undervalued or it could be overvalued, and unless we have any information that tells us otherwise, then the stock is effectively it might not be at the correct value, but it's not at a value that we can trade for profit. So if we don't know whether it's overvalued or undervalued, we can't trade that, even if it is in one of those situations. So hopefully you can agree with me on that one. So now, one thing that often happens is someone makes the claim, okay, I believe arbitrage does not happen instantly. And then they say, because of that, I believe my stock is going to be overvalued and I can go ahead and trade that for some profit. However, they haven't specified their reasoning for the stock being overvalued rather than undervalued. So if you believe that the arbitrage does not happen instantly for the stock, you do need to give some reasoning as to why we are on the side of the stock being overvalued as opposed to undervalued. So hopefully you can agree with me that, without specifying, without providing any evidence to which side we are on, that we can't necessarily trade for profit. So the first point, the less significant claim I'd like to make is that if arbitrage does not happen instantaneously, but we don't have any information that tells us which side we're on, are we undervalued or are we overvalued, then we have an implicit instantaneous arbitrage on the opportunity to make profit. So even though the arbitrage doesn't happen instantly, the arbitrage of the opportunity to make profit happens instantly, because we have no way of knowing which side we're on. And when we don't have information, what we're saying is there's an equal chance of being on either side. And that means that we are effectively in between both sides. We're taking the average. And yeah, if you talk about information theory, then by definition of not having information, that means that both possibilities are of equal likelihood. So if we imagine kind of another graph that describes our opportunity to make profit on the particular data point we're interested in, then you can imagine that this graph faces instantaneous arbitrage implicitly in this scenario where you do not have any information to say otherwise. So that's the less general, that's the weaker claim I've just made first. And now I'd like to move on to an even stronger claim, which is essentially that in pretty much all cases, we actually end up having this instantaneous implicit arbitrage. So I'm going to think about this for a moment and I'll describe what I mean. So let's now consider the more interesting scenario where you genuinely have information somehow, I'm not sure how, but somehow you have information to believe that a stock is overvalued. So some specific situation in the economy has caused the stock to be overvalued, where some participants in the economy are overpaying for this stock, and for some reason you have the information that others don't that allows you to detect this discrepancy, and so you plan on making a trade and profiting off this. So even though you might have the information to lead you to believe that a stock is overvalued, you don't exactly know when this stock is no longer going to be overvalued, so when the arbitrage process has completed. So unless you believe for some reason that this stock is going to be overvalued for a long time, which would be fairly unlikely unless you believe for some bizarre reason that some participants in the economy are really brain dead. But let's suppose it's a reasonable time frame, and after a reasonable amount of time you expect the arbitrage to complete, essentially. So you don't necessarily know when this arbitrage is finished, but obviously your goal is to get in before the arbitrage has finished and get out sometime, and get out once enough of the arbitrage has happened so that you can make some profit. So presumably you're going to be competing against some other traders in the market that have found a similar arbitrage opportunity, and who also believe that the stock is overvalued at this moment in time. If you believe you're the only person in the market that has spotted this, then you're rather lucky, and hopefully you can make some good profit off of that. But let's just consider for now the scenario where there's some genuine competition in the market. And so what happens in that case is that some participants, if we imagine the average kind of time range that participants get in and out, some participants will be late, other participants will be early. And if there's sufficient competition, then what that means is, if you're at the sweet spot, you make profit, but if you're too late or too early, you're going to make a loss. And that loss might not necessarily be a loss due to the price going in the opposite direction of what you believe it to go, it's quite likely that loss is purely just from trade fees, spread, time and effort that had to be put into making this trade. If you're doing any arbitrage on the blockchain, that could be gas fees, etc. And actually, I'm going to do a bit of I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent actually for a second, as I'd like to identify another common misconception, which is that bad, inexperienced new traders lose money because the stock price goes in the opposite direction of what they believe. And this is completely not the case. I suppose it's quite easy to see, and usually this is figured out fairly quickly, is that if a trader was bad in the sense that they lose money by trading in the opposite direction, then you could actually just take the opposite of their trading strategy and suddenly make profit. So you could just, flip the strategy and make profit very easily. And so it's just as hard to identify a winning trade as it is to identify a losing trade in the market. And yeah, not everyone, I suppose a lot of new beginner traders wouldn't realize that for a while. Oh feck, it's green. I don't know how long it's been green for. And so I guess there's kind of two ways that beginner traders can lose money, and that's by not by losing money on each trade purely from the enter price versus their exit price, but from trade fees and from spread, so the difference between the bid and ask price. So you usually just burn through all their money by trading too much, and it's the choice to trade versus to not trade is what causes you to lose money, because it's the trade frequency that decides how much money you lose, and then it's the quality of your trades that hopefully you're making profit that makes up for all the fees and everything. So unless you're doing lots of trading, then on average you have an equal chance of making a profit versus making a loss. And so going back to our situation of the arbitrage opportunity, where you believe a stock is overvalued and you're competing against other traders, and as I was saying, if you get in at the right time, you can make profit. Otherwise, you're going to be making a loss, and that loss doesn't necessarily mean you've traded in the wrong direction. You might actually make a profit, but the profit could be just you got lucky, right? The price went in a particular direction. But I'm talking about the average situation. So you might have got lucky this one time that the price went in the intended direction. But on average, you're trying to make a profit from the arbitrage opportunity, and you would make a loss via the likes of trade fees, spread, etc. But yeah, so by looking at the competition, so if there's enough competition, what we're essentially saying is there's enough traders burning or taking the risk to burn as much fee as possible to make the desired profit. So let's say there's some easy strategy to make €1,000 profit, and right now the only risk involved is €100 trade fee. Well, then it's going to introduce more competition in the market, because more traders could risk burning that trade fee, and more trades would get executed, as long as that opportunity is there. So suddenly traders in total overall might be willing to burn €800 in trade fees in order to attempt to make that €1,000 profit. And now the key point I want to make is that the profit for the trade is no longer based on that original arbitrage opportunity in terms of the stock being overvalued, but it's based on a new arbitrage, on a new data point. That data point being, now I've just lost my concentration, just 1 second. That data point being, is there enough competition in the market yet? So is there too much competition in the market, so traders are trying to burn more money than the amount of money they want to make? Or is there too little competition, and indeed there is overall, on average, there's opportunity for profit? So unless there's no competition for some reason, then we have to look at the arbitrage of the level of competition in the market as well. So is there too much or too little competition? This creates a new graph, and we then need to ask ourselves, do we have information about where we are in this graph, which would be even more challenging. So if you go back to the start, the first claim, even before the first claim I've made, the first idea is that, so let's just summarize the claims from the start before we make any more progress on this. So the first claim is that even if you believe that arbitrage does not happen instantly in the market, that if you don't have any information to tell you what side of arbitrage we're on, are we overvalued, are we undervalued, then there's effectively an implicit instantaneous arbitrage on your opportunity to make profit anyway. So without that extra information, it makes no difference. The fact that arbitrage doesn't happen instantaneously actually makes no difference on the potential for profit. But then we say, well, let's suppose, for sake of argument, that we have identified what side the arbitrage is on. So we're in a situation where the stock is overvalued, and we for some reason have been able to identify that. So if there's no competition, then maybe, geez, the rain is heavy. So if for some reason you have no competition, then yeah, you might be able to make profit. But let's suppose there is competition in the market, and then the question is there too much competition or too little competition at this moment in time? And the amount of competition in the market is now itself susceptible to arbitrage. And unless you have specific information on whether there's too much competition, so whether the competition in some sense is overvalued versus whether the competition is undervalued, so unless you have information on that specifically, then there is still this instantaneous implicit arbitrage when it comes to the opportunity to make profit. And so the arbitrage does not depend on that original data point, on the price being overvalued, but it depends on the next data point, which is the competition that the market faces because of this potential arbitrage opportunity. And so I'm always looking for two key points when someone makes the claim that there's an arbitrage opportunity that they believe is profitable. And so first I ask them, okay, where's your evidence that there is in fact arbitrage on a specific side, so whether it's overvalued or undervalued, rather than just a general claim that the arbitrage is not happening instantly and we're on one side, we might be overvalued or undervalued. I don't care about that general claim, it doesn't help your trade in any way. I need to know a specific claim of why you believe you're on one side of this arbitrage opportunity, which is the stock being overvalued or undervalued. And then the second question is going that level deeper. Either what is your argument for there not being enough competition in the market? So why do you believe you have some advantage of possessing information that literally not even a handful of traders in the economy also possess? Either argue that point, or can you tell me why you believe you possess the information that tells you whether there is too little or too much competition in the market? Because in order to make profit, there needs to be too little competition, so you're joining that competition and making profit. Or there might be a way of kind of flipping your trading strategy in such a way where even if there's too much competition, maybe there's a way of actually arbitraging the competition itself. That might be a little more complex to figure out such a strategy. But you do need some sort of an argument for why your arbitrage opportunity is actually tradable for profit. And simply the existence of non-instantaneous arbitrage in the market does not come anywhere close to the amount of justification needed to argue that your trading strategy can actually be performed. And personally I believe that comes as quite common sense. If you've been trading for a couple of years, I think that comes natural, that just because there's arbitrage opportunity for a certain data point, that does not imply that that data point is tradable for profit. I believe a lot of traders do know that, especially traders that have a lot of experience, but it definitely seems to be a point of confusion, in my opinion, for newer traders, or even sometimes traders who have gotten lucky for a few years and haven't put enough thought into why their trades have been profitable. Now that is of course my opinion, so please feel free to tear my opinion apart in the comment section below. I might only reply to one comment a month, depending on how busy I am, but if I do reply to any comments, I will try to reply in as much detail as I can, try dissect what your argument is and see if I agree with your opinion or whether I have some further reasoning to justify my perspective on the topic. And so I suppose this whole thing boils down to, can you identify whether you have advantage over other participants in the market that allows you to assert that the opportunity itself hasn't been arbitraged away? So I think that's all I'm going to cover in this video. That's an opinion that I've held for a few years now, and yeah, I feel it's a common misconception in the economy that just because arbitrage might not happen instantaneously, that suddenly means that you can immediately trade it for profit. And you do get that with a lot of new investors, where they say, well look, clearly XYZ is overvalued because of whatever economic situation we're in, or some other thing is undervalued. Clearly, you know, arbitrage does not happen instantly, and therefore there's clearly potential for profit. And actually this does bring up one more point I'm going to make before I end this video, and that's another misconception, that because so many terrible traders, so a common misconception that I see in even intermediate traders, so I wouldn't even necessarily say beginner traders in this case, is that because the market consists of so many beginner traders who are like wasting their money, losing tons of money, and have very poor trading performance, that we are competing against them, and therefore we're guaranteed, as intermediate traders, we're guaranteed to make at least a little bit of profit. And this is actually, again, in my opinion, completely wrong, a complete major misconception. So as an intermediate trader, you're not actually competing against beginner traders in the market. So I suppose the first point is that beginner traders are not losing money because they're trading in the wrong direction, where you can easily trade in the opposite direction as an intermediate trader and make money. That's not the case. And it all comes down to the arbitrage of the opportunity to make profit. And if there's too much competition or too little competition, we can arbitrage that competition itself. And to do that, we have to look at the competition of the competition. And I'm probably rushing this argument a bit too much, because, you know, I would prefer to leave this to another video. But it doesn't require much force, but it doesn't require much capital to use up arbitrage opportunity. So basically, you're going to be competing against other traders at a similar level to you, traders that have a similar level of advantage than you, and if you have additional advantage, you won't be competing in the same way. And sometimes there'll be too much competition and you'll be losing money. Sometimes there'll be too little competition and you will be making money. But in order to make successful trades in arbitrage opportunities where there's too little competition, you're competing against other traders who are doing the same thing. So you're not competing against beginner traders who are just burning their money away. So if beginner traders are just trading too much, which is essentially is what's causing them to lose their money, is they're trading too much without any strategy to help them make money. They're not really affecting you in any way. They are putting money into the Like, obviously they're losing money, so someone has to make that money. Firstly, it's not necessarily going to be intermediate traders. It's not kind of a situation where, oh, if I'm intermediate, I make some money. If I'm advanced, I'm making more money. It's really just the best traders out there absorb the opportunities very quickly. And you do need to be a complete top trader to make money at all. But really, the beginner traders are burning money away. That gets injected into the market. And usually then it would be the likes of liquidity providers who earn money on the spread, or the exchange itself that makes money. Those are the types of participants who are making money on the beginner traders. It'd be quite bold to assume that intermediate traders are guaranteed to make at least a certain amount of profit based on the poor performance of the beginner traders. And so yeah, then liquidity providers can make money, but then they're taking on a certain amount of risk, and that will arbitrage against currency and other aspects of the economy. I will talk about all this another time. I'll better articulate my thoughts and have a better argument in a future video. Okay, so I suppose that's going to be all for this video. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you disagree, please let me know. I will try read as many comments as I can, and from time to time I'll try to reply to any comments in as much detail as I can. Okay, see you next time.